Hello. Hello. I hope you're all doing well today. Oh, seem to have a little bit of a sore throat, but um, that's I'm doing better than he is. Will Corduroy ever get up? Oh well, it's my own fault. I usually try to tire him out before I do these things so that he won't cause trouble. But the result is he's too tired to be any fun. On the other hand, he knows that economics really isn't for him. He's like my daughters. Neither of them took any economics in college. Anyway, I hope that you are all doing very well today. We are going to talk about fun stuff. We always talk about fun stuff, but we're going to talk about markets, the division of labor, and capitalism. Very fun stuff. Okay, various things to do. We're going to talk about Adam Smith again. As I've said, many economists will cite Adam Smith, but very few have read him, and very few of those who have read him have actually read all of him. Some of them have read excerpts, usually from the first 10 chapters of book 1 of The Wealth of Nations. Few have read The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he thought was his more important work, and few have read the rest of The Wealth of Nations. So they have a very misguided sense of what The Wealth of Nations is actually about. Anyway, Adam Smith described what we would call production for use. People produce things to consume. If you are exchanging the things you produce for something else, it's because you want to consume the other things. You don't produce for any purpose except consumption, which totally makes sense. You go to work, you get a job over the summer or after school or in winter break. Your purpose is to work until you can accumulate the money to consume. You may want to work enough to be able to pay tuition. You may want to be able to work enough to pay for a trip, whatever. And when you have enough money for those purposes, you stop working because that's what you wanted to do. Capitalist production is not like that. I'll give you an example. One of my brothers is very rich, made a lot of money in real estate investments and other things. One day, one of my sisters was having dinner with him, and his wife, by the way, was also very accomplished. She had been an assistant deputy mayor in the city of New York. She had a high position in a foundation. So my sister looked around and asked, "Why do you bother? You have enough money. Why do you keep working?" And my brother looked at her and said, "It's a way of keeping score." Nothing to do with consumption. He had his apartment. He had a house on Fire Island. His kids were done with college. There was plenty of money. They didn't need any money that he made. They could have lived off of what she made anyway, maybe, but it doesn't matter. Point is, he wasn't working to consume. Capitalists don't work to consume. Some of them work to keep score. They want to have more money than the next guy. Some of them work just because the system rewards people for making profit. Capitalism is not about production for use. It's about production for profit. That changes everything. Okay. Market's not perfect. The Adam Smith problem. What institutions will connect what we want with the production process? Now, Smith himself was a professor of moral philosophy, not economics. His concern was not about market efficiency. It was to promote a peaceful society. Unlike Scotland, where he was living. Throughout his life, he was born shortly after the Act of Union. Scotland was merged in with England and Wales into the United Kingdom. A lot of the Scots didn't like this. They rebelled repeatedly. The most famous rebellion ended at the Battle of Culloden, which was in Outlander, which we will not talk about anymore. Okay, we'll talk about it a little bit. My wife and I have seen a couple seasons. We watched a season or so, and then but then we went back to it. I think we went back to it twice. We might have seen 3 seasons. I don't know how many they have. It's totally ridiculous, but it's kind of fun in its own ridiculous way. Okay, Adam Smith's choice: prosperity through markets or conflict and domination. This is the issue of Adam Smith. It's not about efficiency. It's about, he sees the world dominated by people's love to domineer. In the case of my brother, he wanted to have more money than the next guy so he could show off. Other people will fight wars. The world is ruined by this, by people's. Why is Vladimir Putin invading the Ukraine? He just wants to force people around. Why is he bothered? God, the man must have plenty of money. If he needs more money, you know what? I'm sure the US and the EU, the European Union, would be happy to give him $10 million to walk away. We'll just give you the money, just go away. You can move to Switzerland, and then get yourself a nice chateau, 10 million, 20 million, 30, whatever it would take. It's cheaper than, I think the US alone is giving the Ukraine, it's like $50 billion in support for their to defend themselves against the Russians, which is a lot cheaper than sending American combat troops to defend the world from the Russians. But if we could just pay him, if all he wants is money, then he could have the money. But no, he wants to be able to force people around. Adam Smith says this is the death of us. Stop, instead of competing by war, compete to get rich. Just compete to be the richer person. And in the process of competing to get rich, maybe you, Bill Gates, and you, Steve Jobs, will end up producing stuff that we could all use, and we'd all be better off for it. Okay, competition is an alternative to war and slavery. Smith's argument for markets is moral and political, not economic. Compete to get rich by selling more rather than competing by fighting. Make money, not war. You could make love, not war. That sounds good. Your grandparents' generation went around wearing shirts like that and saying, make love, not war. Well, you know what? It doesn't always work. Love can be great, but it may not be a good way to organize society, because whenever you love someone, you care for them. It means you don't care as much about other people. It's even conceivable that Vladimir Putin loves a bunch of other Russians, but he does not like Ukrainians or Americans. The further and further you get away from the people you love, if love is the motive, then the further and further you get away from the people you love, the more you're ready to nuke other people. love and hate, or at least indifference, can be two sides of the same coin. Smith recognized this. Forget about love. It's not about love for Smith. It's about just harnessing people's interest in appearing to be successful financially. Cognitive caring. You may care about some people a lot. You may care a lot about other Americans even. But if you care about them all that much, then you probably don't care that much about Iraqis or Afghans or Russians. Yeah, here's one. This is one of the worst crimes committed by the American Army in its history. The massacre of as many as 500 unarmed civilians, mostly women and children and old people, in a village in Vietnam, about 50 years ago. Now, the US soldiers were really mad because a whole bunch of them, their friends had been killed. They loved their friends. And they had been killed, they had been shot at, they had hit mines. And it just, their love for their fellow soldiers turned into rage at other people. And they killed them. Now, as it is, there was a helicopter pilot and his gunner and his co-pilot. They saved a whole bunch of the Vietnamese, and they reported what happened, for which they were shunned, ostracized by the soldiers. But Hugh Thompson, loved people in general. Kind of interesting. Had terrible effects on him. Now, Smith replaced love with interests. He replaced the love to domineer, and he replaced just love with interests. Forget about your feelings for other people. Just focus on wanting to be richer than them. And you will get rewarded for treating others decently, even if you don't like them, because you'll make money off them. You may not care about their family, their race, their religion, even their nationality. The desire to profit from other people will overcome your racism, will overcome your homophobia, will overcome your misogyny, will overcome any of these things that are associated with your love. Love for other people of your race, love for other people with your gender preferences, love for other people, from your neighborhood, love for other people from your family. None of those matter. You just want to make money. And if all you want to do is make money, then you will treat other people decently. And this is, I can't express what a serious, almost wonderful thing this is. I mean, this is why people like Milton Friedman just love markets, and Gary Becker. People I often don't agree with on a lot of things, and because I see a lot of problems in markets that they don't see. But behind it all, we share this deep appreciation that markets can be wonderful things. And it's not about the economics. It's that they are the solution to a major social problem. How can people get along? It may not be a complete, anyway, okay. Good things about free markets: democracy, empathy, fairness, diversity. Okay, let's go through them. Markets are democratic. Exchange is voluntary. Nobody makes you do it. You don't want that pair of shoes? Don't buy that pair of shoes. You don't want to pay $5,000 for a ticket to a Bruce Springsteen concert? Don't do it. Your choice. Nobody's making you do it. You do want to pay that money? I don't know. Maybe it's a good thing to do. You'll remember if the rest of your life, it's only money, whatever, but I'm not going to criticize. But okay, that's what you want to do. Go ahead. Your choice. Market competition makes you think about other people. Empathy. Why do you think about other people? Because you want to sell them things. My father would come home, at dinner, we'd talk about, family would all talk about things that he's trying to sell, how he could sell things to people. His idea, maybe we could sell them paper. We have the drivers delivering the coffee. Maybe they could deliver paper. Eventually, water became a big product. Paper was not so much. Sandwiches, pre-packaged sandwiches, gross things. I would never eat them. My father would never eat them, but he would sell them to other people if they wanted to. If they didn't care, okay, yeah. They wanted to have pre-wrapped, tasteless sandwiches in the fridge, so they wouldn't have to go out. My God, they're working in offices in New York City. They could do better than that, but whatever. Anyway, whatever. We don't care. It's voluntary. If they don't want it, we won't sell it. They do want it, that we will give it to them. If this is what they want, if they want to be able to have lunch at their desk, sad, but okay, go for it. We'll sell you the sandwiches. We're just thinking about what it is that you might want. We have to treat people fairly. This guy, Elliot Spitzer, he was governor of New York. He had been attorney general. He was really, had a great future ahead of him, en route to being the country's first Jewish president. Really smart, Harvard grad. It was Columbia Law, though. Maybe I have it backwards. Maybe Columbia undergrad, Harvard Law, like Barack Obama. But really smart, good guy, very successful attorney general, elected governor in a landslide. Resigned because he was so stupid. He was taking cash out of the bank. The bank reported the cash transactions because that's what the banks do. And Elliot Spitzer knew it. And he just wasn't thinking about it. And then he flew down to DC where he saw a hooker and he did things that his wife didn't want to do. I don't care. And you know what? I don't care what he's doing, and I don't care that he was doing it. It's a matter for him and his wife. And she, the whore, whatever, the woman that he was paying was doing it voluntarily, never complained, except that he was caught, and so she lost the customer. It worked for her. He was treating her fairly. Whatever they were doing, it worked. And why did he treat her fairly? So that he could continue the relationship. He was seeing her for quite a while. And of course, he wanted her to keep quiet about it. He didn't want her getting mad at him and calling his wife. He didn't promise her anything that he didn't deliver, it seems. So, treated her fairly. My father would sell people coffee. If they didn't want the coffee, he wouldn't sell it to them. They would buy it. Did they think it was a fair deal? Yeah, sure. Yeah, the major unfairness that cropped up occasionally is that people would pay the drivers to not invoice the transaction, and then they'd pay the drivers cash and walk away with the coffee, and the drivers would walk away with some money, and my father would be the loser. But that's another story. That happened. That's another long story some other time. Okay, markets allow for diversity of interest. Well, Elliot Spitz is one diverse interest, but also, look, why do you have goat cheese? Why does goat cheese exist in the world? Why do mood rings exist in the world? Because somebody wanted them. Why do my mother took me to Jackson Heights, Queens. She liked to shop there and eat in restaurants there. The street signs are in Hindi. There are all these Indian restaurants, so all these different parts of India. Friends from South Asia tell me they think it's really odd that Americans call these Indian restaurants like, what is this? Like, do you have European restaurants? I mean, India is a gigantic place with all these different types of cuisine. But anyway, so my mother had her preferences, which was very spicy Bengali, Bengal. Yeah. That's not the name of the restaurant, the cuisine. Maybe it is, I don't know. Anyway, but stuff's in different languages. There's a variety of cuisines, because you want to find a niche. You discover a niche that's not filled. You move in, you sell people stuff. You make money off of people. And to do that, you have to give them what they want. Markets are the best thing about capitalist economies. When people want to defend capitalism, they slur over capitalism and markets. They're not the same thing. You can have markets without capitalism. Not quite sure. Can you have capitalism without markets? I mean, you definitely can have some aspects of capitalism without markets, but I don't think you can really have capitalism without markets. But it would be something else. But you can definitely have markets without capitalism. They are different things. The free exchange of commodities is the best thing about capitalism. Me giving you something in exchange for you giving me something. And that's what Adam Smith was talking about. But that's not all there is to capitalism. I mean, it's all there is to Milton Friedman's capitalism, or Gary Becker's capitalism, or the capitalism that that Republican politicians and many Democratic politicians talk about. The capitalism that you're taught in high school or in other college classes. But it's not capitalism. Think about it. Is involvement in markets truly free? Is it free if you don't have any money? Is it free if the income distribution is highly unequal, so that some people have a lot more than other people and can buy up the access to the means of production, so that other people will starve if they don't go to work for them? And this is where Marxism comes in, because Marx doesn't say much about markets, because Marx isn't focused on markets, he's focused on production. Milton Friedman says virtually nothing about production. The standard neoclassical story, production goes on in some black box, and they don't care about it. There's a production function. Put in capital, put in labor, you get output. Then they go back to talking about markets. So the orthodox model is all about markets. Marxism is mostly about production, and that has very little overlap between the two. There are some people who overlap, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, Marx, German philosopher, lived there, fled Germany because he was too involved in the revolution of 1848. Well, actually, even before. He fled before. Then he went back to Germany, and then he had to leave again. In between, he was in Paris, where all good people go when they die. And if they're good, they go to heaven. And if they're very good, they go to Paris. Marx is writing focus on production, class conflict over the production process, really over how hard people are going to work. Okay. And Marx talks about varieties of economic institutions. He mostly focuses on three: feudalism, capitalism, and socialism. And we're going to talk a little bit about slavery. But you can, a 2x2 table. Who controls the means of production? Who controls people? Now, if the boss controls you and the boss controls the means of production, that's slavery. You have to work on his damn plantation. But that's not most of production in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. A lot of production in the Roman Empire was slavery. But after the fall, there was relatively little slavery in Europe itself. And slavery was, there was some slavery in the Arab world. There was always some slavery in Asia. There was slavery in Africa, but these are all pretty secondary systems until the 15th century, when the Europeans started buying slaves in large numbers in Africa and moving them out of Africa to work on plantations. This was a system where we call chattel slavery, and we'll get to it. Okay, but in Europe, it was feudalism. Feudalism is where the bosses control the people. If you wanted to get married, if you were a feudal serf and you wanted to get married, you had to get the approval of the lord. If you wanted to move, you had to get the lord to approve. The lord owned you. There were limits on what the lord could do with you. The most important limit being that the lord could not force you to move off the farm, could not take land that you are used to working away from you, could not tell you what to do outside of time that you owed the lord. That's feudalism. The workers control themselves, but the bosses, the workers control the land, but the bosses control the workers. Capitalism, the bosses control the means of production. The bosses control the land, and the workers are free to move around, marry, starve, whatever. And then Marx imagined a world of socialism where the workers would control themselves and the workers would control the production process. We occasionally see glimpses of that type of world. Okay, feudalism, or before feudalism, something that's not slavery. The circuit of production is simple. You produce a commodity, C, and you consume the commodity, C. You grow, you catch a fish, you grow rice, you make some crafts, and you consume them. Production for use. Now, maybe you don't want the crafts. You don't want the fish. You don't want the rice. What you want is to pay your Netflix bill. So you sell these things to Netflix in exchange for access to the Netflix library. C for C prime. That's barter. Netflix, takes your crafts, maybe Netflix eats your fish, eats your rice, and lets you watch a movie. Okay. But Netflix may not want your crafts, may not want your rice, may not want your fish. They want cash. So how can you pay your Netflix bill with your crafts or rice or fish? You sell them for money. So you turn your C into M and you turn it to C prime. Whether you consume the C, whether you consume the C prime, whether you trade it for money, you are doing this so you can consume. This is production for use. The whole reason you do this is so you can use something. Netflix, rice, whatever. Now, production for use is common. I mean, in feudal Europe, that's basically what it is. The serfs would produce, they'd consume, they'd give some of it to the lord would consume it, the lords would go off and fight wars or jousts or whatever. Small artisans, craftspeople would make things, they'd consume some, they'd sell others for money, maybe they'd trade some for commodities, for food. Everybody just kind of produced in order to consume. This is the way a lot of people still live. You work so that you can pay your Netflix bill, pay your tuition, production for use. Now, in the process, there's very little productivity growth. Theoretically, you can imagine that, well, people in control of the work process should still try to make their work easier, get more free time, But it seems that there's very little interest in that. You work, you come up with a better way to produce stuff. You could get your work done faster, and then you could lie around and have more leisure time. If your whole goal is to just pay your tuition, then are you really in a hurry? Do you really want to work harder? Do you really want to put the effort into figuring out better ways? Probably not, but it seems that way. Another possibility is that the serfs under feudalism didn't bother, because if they did figure, and there is historical documentation of this, if they did figure out a way to increase their productivity, it all went away in higher rents. The lords figured out, hey, they can produce more stuff in the same time, so let's keep them working the same amount of time, and we'll just carve out more in rents. In any case, another piece is they didn't have Netflix. They didn't have Amazon Prime. They didn't have Paramount Plus. They didn't have HBO Max. They didn't have Stars. Oh my God, Disney, Apple. What is that, 7? And there are more. I hate it. That's why, we still have Netflix and we get Amazon Prime for free, because we want the Prime anyway. Otherwise we use a pirate service that I would do it because I'm just mad. I mean, why do I have to pay separately for all these different things? Okay. Anyway, there's nothing much to buy back in feudal Europe. Now, traditional slavery, domestic slavery, was production for use. It's just that the slaves were consumed. The slaves performed household chores. You'd get a slave and you'd work the slave to clean your house, or maybe take care of your horses, whatever. You're basically consuming the slave directly. Are not the same as what happened later. Now, capitalism started coming in late medieval Europe, 15th century. Maybe some people say 14th century. I think that's probably pushing it, but and it wasn't about markets. There were always markets. Capitalism came in when the bosses started gaining control over the means of production, where they would hire workers. So it wasn't that the feudal lords started using the serfs in a different way. No, this isn't the feudal lords. This isn't, the capitalists didn't own the workers. They had no control over the workers. They bought the workers' time, just like you would buy rice or Netflix. Workers' time was a commodity. Capitalists had means of production, farmland or workshops, where workers would weave or spin, and capitalists started hiring workers. At the same time, you started getting a new form of slavery, and you started getting, here it is, you started getting more markets. Now, capitalism is about producing commodities for profit. Remember, feudalism, early slavery, production for use. Capitalists don't care about what they're making. They just want to make money. They want to use workers' time, pay the workers a fair wage for their time, work the workers hard so that the workers will produce more than the value of their time, and sell what the workers produce, pocketing profit. Capitalists don't care what they're making. You have this all the time. I mean, that's happened. My father drank coffee, but it didn't matter. My brother didn't drink coffee when he went into the business. My father told me, you got to start drinking coffee so that you can judge the quality of the coffee. So my brother started drinking it, and he got into it. But he didn't need, it was convenient. But, do the heads of the major Hollywood studios watch the movies they make? Do they watch the TV shows they make? Maybe, but it's by no means essential. Do the heads of the major food companies eat the food they make? Do the CEOs of Boeing, do they fly around the country? I mean, actually, they probably do, but it's not essential. It doesn't really matter what they're doing, because what they consume can be completely different. The point of making the stuff is to make a profit, not to have something that they can consume. And capitalism is an expansive system, which we'll get to in a minute. Capitalists don't care what they produce. They don't consume at all their own product. Workers work for pay, not to consume the product. So nobody in the production process necessarily cares about what they're making. The workers work for wages that they will then spend for their consumption, and the capitalists work for the profits when they get the workers to work for more time than is needed to produce their own wage, which is all free exchange. Again, nobody's being exploited here. Nobody's making you do it. Of course, if you're a worker and you don't work, well, you can starve. You're free to starve. Capitalism depends on a great inequality in the distribution of wealth, where a few people own most of the means of production. Capitalism depends on restrictions on independent access to subsistence. When the English capitalist system started going, the government started putting in all these restrictions on people hunting or fishing. Slave labor worked really well. It wasn't capitalism, but it worked really well to make profits. For at least some people. Now, capitalism developed with chattel slavery, which is something that advocates of capitalism have never liked talking about. And they are different. Capitalism and slavery are different systems. Capitalists don't own the workers. The greatest profits in slavery, came for those who stole the slaves in Africa, although they were also taking great risks in doing so. But once they got the slaves to Jamaica or Barbados or Brazil, when they sold the slaves could be sold at about the expected present value of the surplus that the slave would be producing. So profits could be limited there. The greatest profits often were in the slave trade itself. But in any case, slave economies were built on production of commodities for profit, which is different than feudalism, and starts looking a lot like capitalism. Chattel slaves, different than domestic slavery that went on for millennia. Chattel slaves produced sugar, cotton, other commodities for sale. So slavery depended on this development of commodity markets. More than that, because the slaves were producing export commodities, the slaves themselves depended on their subsistence. I mean, they would grow some stuff themselves, but they depended on imported commodities, food and other commodities imported, generally from North America. They depended on the whole system because the slave owners in Jamaica, Barbados, Brazil were laying out a lot of cash in advance for these slaves that they were buying. They depended on financial markets in London, or to a lesser extent, Boston and New York. They depended on financial markets for the flow of commodities, foodstuffs down to the slave colonies from North America, sugar, especially sugar, and later cotton to Europe. Who was financing that? Banks and financial intermediaries in New York, Boston, and London. Go on down. The slave trade involved the exchange of cotton goods purchased in India, later in New England and Old England, guns and metal products manufactured in Europe, a little bit North America. Somebody borrowed money for those from banks and other financial intermediaries, sent them to Africa, where they bought the slaves and shipped them over to the Caribbean, the southern states, the United States, Brazil, etc. Somebody was financing all this. Somebody was buying insurance. So the slave system was tightly integrated with the development of commodity economies and capitalist economies. You know, it's not capitalism, but it was integrated with capitalism. Could capitalism have developed without slavery? I guess. Yes, I think so. But it's no accident that they developed together. Okay, chattel slavery began with the Portuguese, Sao Tome. I don't know if any of you are of descent from there. Islands off West Africa in the 15th century. Sugar was imported from Southeast Asia, sold as a commodity in Europe. Let me just see what this is. Okay. The Portuguese took the technology of sugar production to Brazil. By this point, the Portuguese had kind of really, I mean, what they were doing in Southeast Asia was really nothing compared to what the Portuguese were really developing this technology. They took it to Brazil, which, if you remember high school history, Brazil, the little tip of Brazil, was Portuguese by the treaty that the Portuguese and the Spanish arranged through the intermediation of the Pope. So the Spanish got everything west, the Portuguese got Africa and a bit of Brazil, which where they started cultivating sugar using African slaves. What this did to Africa is horrific, but that's another course. The Dutch took over Brazil for a little while. There's a lot of money being made. The Dutch wanted that piece of it. The Portuguese took it back, and the Dutch hightailed it to Barbados, where they gave the technology to the English and started importing slaves. And then the English took Jamaica from the Spanish, and it just kept building. 12 million Africans were loaded on ships in West Africa. The number of Africans who were actually taken at some point is a lot more. It's estimated, though nobody really has any idea, that 2 million died being taken to the ships. So that would be 14 million Africans. The population of Black Africa at this time was like 50 million people. But of course, this is over a period of several hundred years. So as a share of the total population, it's much less than 28%. Chattel slavery, use of slaves to make profits. This is new. Social death. That's different. As chattel slaves had no meaningful connection. I mean, they had emotional connections themselves, but they had no connection recognized in law. Yeah, they lost connections with their people back in Africa. They lost connections with people on the ship. They lost connections with any family members, or they often lost connection with any family members they made in the New World. In fact, the planters would make a point of integrating their workforce, their slave population, with people from different parts of Africa to make it harder for them to organize resistance. That way, slavery was kind of the perfect market. Adam Smith, who was very much anti-slavery, didn't quite catch this, but it's completely impersonal. Slaves only exist to work and produce profit. It's just about the money. American slavery was racial, but remember, it's completely impersonal. It didn't have to be. Racism developed in the 18th century really in reaction to the anti-slavery movement, when the slave owners needed to justify what they were doing. So they started rationalizing it on racial grounds. And it really took on a life of its own after slavery was ended. And maybe the high period of so-called scientific racism was in the 20th century. Long after the last slave economies, well, there's probably still slavery in parts of the Arabian Peninsula and all, but slavery is mostly gone from the world. But racism persists. Racism came late to slavery and has persisted after. The point is that you didn't need race to justify slavery. Race, it was convenient. It's convenient. You say, oh, well, these people are better off, Africans are better off. But and the better arguments for slavery, and this, I'm saying this just in terms of intellectual respect, and not in terms of, I don't agree at all with these people, but somebody like George Fitzhugh from Virginia made maybe the best arguments for slavery, and it was without regard to race. In fact, he had the nerve to come north in the 1850s and give lectures defending slavery and saying that workers in the North should be enslaved. It would be better if everybody was a slave. You see, isn't that great? Yeah, really, it's and anti-slavery aborted on socialism. Marx was very much anti-slavery, a strong supporter of the Union in the Civil War. Just like the ideology of slavery transcended race, so did the ideology of anti-slavery become inclusive of race. That anti-slavery people, as Lincoln himself said at some point, like, oh, I don't know about whether I believe in equality, whatever, but I do believe in this form of equality, paraphrasing Lincoln, that the Black man, as much as the white man, is entitled to the fruits of his labor. Anti-slavery became a pro-worker position. Every worker is entitled to control their labor. But what happens to capitalism if workers control their labor and get the full fruit of their labor? There's no place for capitalism. Capitalist circuit of production starts and ends with money. The purpose of capitalism is to make a profit. As my father said to me, my business is not an eleemosynary institution. Look up eleemosynary. It has a lot of ease. Use the money to buy the workers' time. The workers' time, you start with money, get the workers' time, put the workers to work during that time. They produce commodities, sell the commodities, get money back. Now, if M prime is not greater than M, you're not going to stay a capitalist for long. The point is to make profit, and you'll only make profit when M prime is greater than M, which means you only make profit when the value of what the workers produce is greater than the value of their time. You have to get the workers to work hard and productively. C to C prime, that's simple commodity production, simple commodity production. Profit, capitalism. Now, where's the profit go? If the workers consume what they earn, if C and M prime are the same, then there's no profit. You make profit because what the workers produce is greater in value than their own consumption. So where does that other product go? This is what we call the realization problem, a problem of effective demand. John Maynard Keynes and Karl Marx both addressed this. Capitalists for themselves are always looking to raise productivity, get more C prime from the C. Invention and innovation accelerate under capitalism. Capitalists who don't innovate die. You've got to be there all the time, out there, figuring out better ways to do it. Capitalists always need more workers, because what do you do with the M prime? You hire more workers so you can get bigger still and make more profit. Capitalism is always dynamic, new technologies, and expansive. Capitalism always out there, raising incomes, expanding. Capitalism unites incentive and power. Capitalism is a reason why capitalism has transformed the world in ways that, and at a speed that nothing else has ever done. Because you put together an incentive with power, the power to do it. Capitalists who want to make changes in their production system, just go and do it. Capitalists who want to expand, go out and hire more workers. Go take your production to some other country. Capitalism's out there all the time, making more. And capitalism is spread from a little piece of Northwest Europe to the entire world. Expands, incorporate more workers, bring in immigrants, get people who were involved in independent home production into workplaces. Of course, there are problems. You start running out of new workers. And what happens then? Wages start going up. Oh, there go your profits. You're producing so much more than your workers are able to consume. How do you realize this? You have to find somebody to sell it to. You start using up the commons, and then we all die. Growing share of our work is under capitalism. Capitalism is expanding for more wage labor, new markets, Coca-Cola all over the world, Disneyland, France. Takeaway points. Markets coordinate the division of labor, encourage people to produce for others. Capitalists seek profit, not value, not use value. And capitalism is an expansive system. Okay, we'll stop the share there. We covered a whole lot today. I hope I didn't lose you, but in any case, these are all really important issues, and we should talk about them a lot more. I've said this course should be a lot longer than it is, but whatever. Okay, anyway, have a good day. Live long and prosper. Bye-bye.